Hi, my name is Robert Baharian and I'm the founder and CEO of Baharian Wealth Management. I'm here today at the impressive Audi Melbourne showroom here in Melbourne CBD, where we hosted our property investors and property developers forum for 2019. We've been hearing a whole bunch of stuff from the media about our property Armageddon, the property doom and gloom, and the imminent property collapse. So we decided to get a panel of speakers, all experts in their own field, to hear what's actually going on in the real world, what's happening in each of these businesses. And we wanted to bring the truth to investors and developers alike. We had a great turnout, we had great discussion, debate and dialogue. Here's how the day went. Hope you enjoy it. Have a great day. I might kick off. Look, thank you everyone for joining us today. And the reason why we've got these people is they're all experts in different elements of the property development phase. And why we've got these people along today is to give us insight into what is happening in your field. What are you doing? What is happening? Contrary to what we're being told as consumers, we're very interested to understand what is going on in your area. I read this headline in The Australian about a week ago, and it said, "Election sparks mini boom." Apparently, the Chinese realise that Australia's outlook has changed, and it's apparently created a surge of buying activity that's skyrocketed apartment prices by 10% in 2 weeks. And East Coast developers are saying there is a rush of buyer interest which is being converted into orders, and apparently the banks are seeing a big rise in loan inquiries. I might just start, Peter, because you're, I think, at the earliest stage of the development phase. Ross and Claire probably at the next phase, and Josh, I think you might be able to chime in from a structuring and sort of tax point of view and talking about what your clients are doing. Peter, can you give us some insight into talking about the election over the last couple of weeks? What has that translated into? What's happening in your world?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The simple fact that statement is not an accurate statement. Anybody that's dealing with the Chinese market would know at the moment the Chinese cannot get money out of China. So there is a huge roadblock. I've got a major Chinese client with several large projects. They were getting all their funds from overseas. That has dried up completely. We are now getting our funding from second-tier lenders and paying 11, 12%. That's the only way we can get these projects to continue moving on. Most of them are pre-sold, so we're trying to deliver the sites, but this business of the market and prices going through the roof, I think if you read in the paper in the last few days, there was an apartment builder went bust on Friday. I think Zealous was their name. And there's another one in trouble at the moment, which was earlier in this week. So there's certainly, if it was my money, I certainly wouldn't be putting it into an apartment building under any circumstances.
Ross, what's going on in your world? In the sales process, in the development phase, really early on, what are you guys seeing?
Well, first of all, to the question about the election, it's been fantastic, because no doubt the biggest issue for all of us are consumers. If consumers don't buy and business people don't want to invest, well, nothing's going to happen. And there's no doubt that since the election, we've seen, look, we've always had traffic at our displays, but now the traffic is becoming a lot more real, and there's real interest in buying again. So I think that we've got to, because one of the things about this whole bus thing is there's no doubt with Royal Commission into banks, etc., what we've done is bashed all the customers around so that they just feel, well, that nobody wants us. And obviously that's far from the truth. So I think with the election result, I think we have got a new wave. Now, whether it's going to turn into a boom, I don't think so, because affordability is still the biggest issue that we're facing.
Yeah, and I'll touch on affordability in a moment. Claire, can you tell us what your clients, maybe if you want to explain to the room who some of your clients are, just to put it into perspective, and then maybe give us some insight into what some of your clients are doing at the moment.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I have a portfolio of clients in the corporate institutional real estate space, which are a combination of listed real estate investment trusts and large private companies. And they'll be active in construction and investment across resi, office, industrial, retail. So what am I seeing as a result of the election? I'll probably, nothing major from a banking perspective at this stage. I think probably improved sentiment. The property prices are such fodder for the media, and some of the headlines you had up there before were just ridiculous. And one day there's a property boom, and the next day it's all falling apart, and a lot of it is exaggerated and not true. What I can say about our client base is that where we have funded large resi towers, for example, they have settled absolutely fine on my portfolio. Where defaults might have been 1% before, they might now be 2 or 3%. But that's after the bank has exited the project. The bank will be repaid first, and then the developer. So what they do is they find a way to deal with each of those purchases that can't complete on a case-by-case basis, and whether that's allowing them to develop to keep the deposit and move on, and there's all sorts of ways that people can deal with that, and that's being done just like it's always been done. So I don't see a really big change in that.
And Josh, same question to you. What are your clients doing? What's going on in that space?
Well, first of all, I don't really believe what's in the media. Unfortunately, most of my clients are private family groups trying to do business well, successfully, and unfortunately they'll get quoted in the media, and half the time they're quoted incorrectly. So, but secondly, I guess we're all happy with the election results. Everyone here is a wholesale investor, so we're all happy with the results, right? All the tax changes, at least we got some relief. But effectively what's happening in the market is banks aren't lending, not their fault entirely. And so effectively housing stock has been shifted. Clients that were looking to develop 120 apartments, lots in the eastern suburbs have had to reconfigure. So who's going to buy property now? Well, basically people that can get finance. So they're people with 2 incomes, people that are downsizing. So what you'll probably see if you drive out there in good suburbs in particular, where clients are shrinking their products down into downsizer markets or first home buyer markets, really low, 1 mil sub market. So my clients have sort of had to adjust. It's been tough. But having said that, anecdotally, I agree nothing substantially has changed, but after the election, I had a client that wants to build 140 apartments in Glen Iris on High Street. They were looking to launch that and marketing next year. And then after the election, I got a call and said, Josh, we're launching this in 2 months. Okay, so that was quite interesting. So I've sort of asked my other developers what their thoughts are, and I think sentiment's propped up a bit, because I think there's lots of pent-up demand. Okay, but structurally, we need obviously more financing and to help.
I'm curious, Peter, your comment that you wouldn't touch apartments. You and I share that the same. Can you tell us why? What's your point of view on that?
Well, there's a surplus of apartments.
And you're talking as a buyer of the end product, right?
Correct, the end product. Construction costs are at an all-time high. Land price to buy the site is at an all-time high. The cost of getting a permit now on a large apartment project runs anything up to $1 million. So that all goes back into the price. So the real problem you've got is that the new apartments are really, the only way they can compete is if they cut things out. They remove some of the quality items, they put lesser quality items, import more stuff. And so I think also there's a pretty ordinary sentiment in the marketplace. I rented an apartment down here in Abbotsford, and we had the people come through just recently and check for the inflammable material. And so that frightened everybody in the building. The body corporate had to meet to discuss it. And so those are the things that are in the marketplace. The sentiment is not good at the moment. If you're going to invest and you can buy in the inner city of Melbourne and you can buy a property that's already built, that's pretty good buying, because all that's going to happen in future is that's going to continue to appreciate.
Josh, do you have a different point of view, given a lot of your clients are building these things and selling them? Do you have a different point of view to Peter, or you share his views?
I think it's pockets. Certainly, I wouldn't want to touch any apartments in the city, and I shouldn't say that for some clients. But there's a market for them, right? So there might be people from overseas that are happy to invest, and there will be people that move into them. The residency is very low. But having said that, a couple of I'm not a demographer, right? But a couple of simple things. One is, if you think about Australia as a economy, if you like, in order to grow, we need more people, and we're not delivering enough people naturally. So where we're going to get the people, good people from overseas, and there's going to be competing demand for good people from overseas to come. And secondly, in my firm, we do quite regular property developer series, and the stats, if you get real proper stats, it basically shows that we're undersupply in housing stock given the number of people coming across. Okay, so I think overall supply is not necessarily an issue, but there might be oversupply in pockets. That's my personal view.
Sure. I might just, we've got a couple of, where are the mics? Where are the roving mics that we have? Kate, yep, Kate's got one. I think there might be another one. Abigail, do you want to grab a mic? Does anyone on the floor have any questions maybe to begin with? Yes, maybe just wait for one of the mics. We want your voice recorded on our video, Frank.
Thank you. I've got two questions, if I can. One's for Robert.
Sure.
Any chance of getting that slide deck? Because my eyesight's not what it used to be.
Sure, we'll distribute the soft copies of those.
Right, wonderful. And second question's probably for Claire, but for the whole panel. Why are the banks tightening up their lending? Why is lending so difficult to residential customers?
Okay, noting that residential lending to that market's not my area of expertise, I do have some comments on it. The housing market and the what goes into pricing is driven by a bunch of things, including government policies, and things like changes to stamp duty and first home buyers incentives can change that.
Doesn't affect the bank's policy. Why stamp duty shouldn't affect whether the banks will lend?
No, it doesn't. So there's another thing. So obviously interest rates, the RBA cut, that's another thing which is a factor. We also have our prudential regulator, APRA, which has put restrictions on there's been 3 changes to APRA policy, or APRA calls it measures, but it is policy effectively for the banks. There's been 3 changes in the last 12 months to those measures. They've removed the restrictions around the amount of the book that can be out to interest-only loans. They've removed their restrictions around the amount of the book that can be out to investor loans. So that has that, together with lower interest rates, sort of may flow through to make things easier for the banks to lend. And the third thing they've changed is the serviceability rate. So APRA would say to us previously, you must calculate the interest as if it was at 7%. And they've recently changed that to say you can now calculate the interest as if it was at the rate the loan is agreed for, plus 2.5%. So if you sort of add all that together, that will improve the sort of servicing calculation that should be a net positive for residential borrowers.
Did you, Ross or Peter, want to add?
Yeah, well, on a pragmatic note, I mean, obviously, the government wanted to get the property down, and the best way to do it is to curtail lending. And that was the obvious reason. It's worked, and I've got to say, as somebody that because for us selling to mums and dads, it was out of control. And the thing is, if this thing had kept going for any longer,
Why was it out of control?
it was going up far too high. And it's all got to do with land prices. It's got nothing to do with house prices. House prices aren't part of the issue. It's the land price. As Peter knows, land prices have doubled. Once upon a time, we'd say $200,000 was the benchmark for a normal house and land buy. But now it's gone up to 400,000 and 350,000. And where you don't get salary increases, people can't afford that anymore. And so it become a huge political football as well, you know. So, look, you know, we just got to understand those are the things. And I think that in hindsight, I think provided this doesn't go on for too long, you know, and they loosen up as they are, I think, as you've just said, I think it's probably a good thing because it makes the whole market far more sustainable than having this huge spike that we've had.
The APRA rate was at 7.25%. Then they built another 2.25% as a margin just in case. So people were being assessed on a 9.5% loan. Now, if the current rate is 4.5% plus 2.5%, 2.25% margin, you're talking 6.5 as against 9.5. So that had a huge impact on what people could afford to buy. The other thing, just to give you an example of land prices, we're running a project out at Truganini. The land on stage 1, we've just delivered the first 5 stages. Stage 1, we were averaging 225. Stage 18 and 19, we're selling at 385, the same lot. So that'll give you an idea of how the prices have gone as far as just raw blocks of land. So that's been a huge factor. Housing prices have basically just gone up with inflation, not very much at all. But it's been the land growth that's really had a major impact.
And actually, Robert, you mentioned that you didn't think there was a supply issue. Somebody said there is an issue with supply. It's supply of land, affordable land. Sure. And the reality is it hasn't caught up with. I think the amount of migration that we've had, I think everybody underestimated that. And it certainly has caught everybody off, you know, including the land supply was definitely not keeping up with it. And even if the land was available, it wasn't getting through all the planning authorities and, you know, there's huge bank up there. So, and I think now, because one of the real problems, I think, in the market was that land developers were selling land 12 months, you know, before they could actually, or even up to 18 months, 2 years before you can get a title, which is crazy stuff, really, when you think about it. So I think actually this period now is a period where all that will hopefully rationalise a bit, and it'll make I think the market a far more reasonable market to operate in. I know for a builder, you know, we've got no idea what the house prices are going to be in 14 months' time or 18 months' time we're going to build it. But land and the migration, though, and I'll give you a statistic, 70% of our customers are either of Chinese or Indian background. Now that's enormous because that tells you the impact, you know, we're the largest house builder in Australia. This is mainly Melbourne and Sydney, right? You know, that's that. So if politically migration gets a belting, well, you know, I think that will certainly have a real impact on where this whole property market goes. And, you know, I don't think we want to underestimate that. I think that, and obviously interest rates and where they're going, I think they're probably the 2 biggest factors. Sure. And supply, obviously, making sure the banks actually lend the money.
To give you an idea, in 2006, the whole of Australia's migration rate was 123,000 people. In 2017 and 18 in Victoria alone, it was 144,000. So that growth, and that helped drive it. Then you've now got that all being pulled out from under those people. So there is the market is still there, but they can't get their funding, and this will help because it will soften land prices, and that will then enable more people to get back. And with the change in the APRA rates, that'll enable more people to get back into the marketplace.
What other questions do we have from the floor? Got a question for this gentleman over here.
When do you see the bottom of the residential market occurring, if you throw a blanket over Melbourne, and how long do you think it'll be on the bottom?
That's a very difficult question to answer, but because there are a number of factors that are involved in this. The best question is to ask any of the land developers here, because some land developers, their sales have fallen by 80%. Now that's drastic. You know, and the truth is, I think that I'm not too sure whether that's actually turned around. For instance, the homes we're selling to are to people who bought their blocks 1 and 2 years ago, and eventually that's going to get cleaned up. There's a whole lot of distress where speculators have got land on Gumtree, etc., etc. So that's all got to flow through the market. So there's going to be a period. I hope it's only going to be about 6 months. That's my guess on it all.
I think what the mistake is really in your question, the whole of Melbourne. Melbourne has always been a segmented market. There's markets within the markets. If you look at the latest CoreLogic results, you've got a number of suburbs that are still increasing in price, but you've got some that have taken 10, 15, 20% hits. So that, and especially if it's in the top end suburbs like Kew, North Balwyn, that's distorts the market as well. So you've got to look at market by market. So if you're going to invest, you need to do the research so you know which market to invest in. Because, I mean, if you go to, for instance, to Ballarat, near where I live, that market's just continued to go. It's still appreciating at 5, 6, 7, 8% per annum. Land sales that are at an all-time high. So it comes back to the individual markets, and you've really got to do that work.
I think as Peter said, like one of the markets, or the market that is doing really well at the moment is regional Victoria. Why? It's more affordable, and in fact most of those markets are still going up, and they've largely been unaffected by any of this. Those markets are going very well. Ballarat, Bendigos and those places.
Got a question over here at the front.
What about the effect of lifestyle on? We're seeing a generation of kids that don't see housing as affordable. They now travel overseas. They now spend more money on restaurants, etc., etc. And they've got parents like myself. They're going to have to fork out, a shitload of money to. So that's really sustaining a lot of the market, isn't it? The market is being sustained by the elderly people like myself in the room. So what about the lifestyle of this new generation and the effect that that's going to have on the property market?
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge question, and in fact, though, there is an answer. Morrison has said this 5% deposit, low deposit, because the truth is, young people today can't save for all the reasons you're saying. They go and travel overseas, etc. Before you know where they are, they're 30 years old. They're going to get married. It's a bit too late. But a lot of them have got two good incomes. So why do they have to have? Why do they have to have 30% or 20% deposit? It's crazy. And actually, in Western Australia, they've got a thing called Keystart. So it's a government-run, state government-run bank. Effectively, the first-home buyer only has to have 5%, and they get a genuine 95% loan. And they've been doing that for years, and they have no defaults, or virtually no defaults. It works brilliantly. And I think if we could get Keystart, the way it is in Western Australia, right around Australia, that would largely solve the first home buyer market. At least the people who've got the income would be able to buy, because this deposit gap is massive, and it's a massive challenge for the whole market.
Well, there was an article in, I think, the paper in the last 24 hours regarding that it's cheaper now to buy in a number of markets than it is to rent.
Yeah.
When I rented an apartment down here at opposite IKEA down in Victoria Street, I only went to 3 inspections, and I was one of 100 people each time. So I gave it away. I got a professional group in to go and rent an apartment for me, and it still took them 6 weeks to find an apartment, because every time you got there for an inspection, there was 100 people. It was just crazy going into a 1 or 2 bedroom flat. So, and the rents on those apartments are going up. And what happened with my particular apartment, which is common, they said, yes, you can have it, but how much are you prepared to pay? I said, well, this is what you wanted for it. And they said, yeah, but there's someone else who will pay this amount for it. So it became a Dutch auction. But that's really what's happening right across. And every time in the complex I'm in, there's 3 buildings. There's hundreds of people who try to rent an apartment each time. So in the end, they're going to have to compromise. Those young people are going to have to either buy an apartment, or they're going to have to move a little further out and buy a house and land package of some sort.
There's another asset class which a lot of our clients are talking about, which I think will happen, which is build to rent. Not to be confused with affordable housing. So build to rent comes from a successful model in the US and the UK, where they the investor, builds the property, holds it, and the key to making it successful is to make it so good that people don't want to leave. Make it, great community, refurbish it every 5 years, and you'll have this generation that will just assume that that's, they are happy to do that. They don't want to have, for those who don't have parents who are kind enough to purchase them a house.
Well, I'm not yet, but...
But
Josh,
that is something that's been challenging here because to make the yields work with the taxes around stamp duty and land tax, it's not coming up to a point where there's widespread investment in it. But Mirvac's announced a few projects, and there are a lot of others that are looking at it. So I think that's an asset class we will see coming online over the next couple of years.
Josh, do you have any comments? Are your clients doing anything in that space? Are they doing any developments in that space?
I've got one client here, actually, John Lim from Land Prime. So in Europe, actually, a model that they use quite as a standard, for example, in Germany, is something called a Baugruppen model, where a collective of people like us might cut out the developer. We basically find a block of land and we go project manage it and build our own sort of housing next to each other. Okay, so
Good luck with these folks.
yeah, well, not with these folks. Their lots will be too big, but there's efficiency there because you can kind of it's a community. You cut out the developer margins, and so it kind of helps with the cost of getting in. That's one part, and that's good for townhouse type projects. So there's a little bit of innovation that's needed, and but secondly, to your point about lifestyle, I guess I'm the youngest one here in this group. It's very rare. It wasn't targeted at you, mate. It wasn't targeted at you. Yeah, youngest male. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, so
Interruption by the audience, please.
So I work in an accounting firm, and the average age is about 27, 28, okay? And basically none of them want to live how their parents lived. It's very rare now that they want the backyard. In fact, I've got two people on my team, managers. They actually bought established houses with big blocks, and they're actually looking to downsize and come closer into the city. Time is really important, and also just because of the cost of house prices, and the cost of having family, it's incredibly hard to have kids and survive on one income. So basically, both parents are busy working with kids in childcare. That's the norm now, and in my generation. So the product mix is definitely changing.
So are we sitting here under the impression or have a perception that this is not normal, this is not how people are supposed to live? Yet when we speak to, I think I'm a little bit younger than you, Josh. When we speak to that sort of next generation, Paul, you talk about your kids, for example. Do we find out what they want, how they want to live? One of the things we've certainly seen with our clients is a number of our clients, a high majority, we are drawing money from investments. We are financing partly the cost of buying and the cost of acquiring property. So it is absolutely normal, and I think the next generation is being underestimated in their ability because of the wealth that the baby boomers have. That's going somewhere, right? And that's drooping right down. And I think the kids will be beneficiaries of that. Josh, you talk about the concept in Germany. In Australia, a lot of people are renting offices, right? There are those that buy their own offices and so forth. Mm-hmm. So, businesses like ours, for example, it's normal to go in, rent an office, fit it out for, the longer lease we can get, the longer lease we want, right? Mm-hmm. So we can capitalise expenditure over longer periods of time. Yeah. Why is that concept not normal in the residential, but when it comes to business, it's quite normal? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, mate, maybe I'll pass it back to you because you've obviously chosen to rent rather than buy. I think it comes down to very individual because I have clients that want to buy, and there's certainly people I know here that have bought where they work, and there's certainly people here clients that have rented where they want. So
sure.
Often it just comes down to capital, right? Do I invest in buying the property or do I invest in the business because I'm starting to build it up? Partly it's probably that, I would imagine.
Sure.
Like, do you think Mr. and Mrs. Average think like that? You know, there's a big part of the population, right, who are really just built up in terms of what their parents did, etc. And I think this whole home ownership, you know, the whole cultural value of owning your own home is still pretty big, but it's starting to get squashed for all the reasons you're talking about, Paul. And personally, I think that would be a really bad blow, because that's one of the great things about Australia, that people who want to own their own home can do it. And if we lose that ability and we force people into rental, I think that could cause... well, look, we know it's happening in Europe, but they have to do it. There's no choice there. You know.
Big tax benefit for your principal plus residents.
Yeah, that's right. That is the key tax planning that still exists to own your own home.
Question here, Brian?
Yep. My question, I've just listening to what everyone's talking about. I've been a student of markets, and we're talking about a market here. And okay, there's markets within markets, but we're really talking about each generation achieving a certain thing in their life and that which they want to grow on. In terms of what's happening in the marketplace, one of the suppliers, banks, have decided, for all the reasons we've said, and governments stuck their fist into it and created difficulties for a lot of people. That's changed the pace and the value of properties and all the rest of it. There is a demand that you've recognised and everyone recognises, and a lot of people who've invested want to get something back. I'm interested to hear, if the banks stay out of the market's going to do something else. We talked about build to rent. What is, in your view, the alternative possibilities for people who want to get into these markets? Because the way I see it, the banks are there to lend money to make money. If they don't do it, they're not going to be happy about someone in Western Australia coming up with some new program. They're going to say, wait on, we want that, we'll buy that company. So what do you see as alternatives for people to do the things that we all want to do? Buy a property, get our families in there, invest, grow, all of those things.
Well, Harry Triggerboff, who owns Meriton, he actually lends them the deposit and he funds the purchase of an apartment at 3%. And he's been doing that for some time. And there was an article the other day where he's thinking of cutting it out because the market, he believes, with the change, the government remaining in place, that the banks will be forced to ease their lending restrictions, because at the end of the day, what he said, that the banks have to give a dividend to their investors, and the investors in the banks are not going to take a lesser investment or a lesser return, and that's going to build that pressure. The other interesting factor which all the property companies and anybody that's here is involved in a property company is the bonuses for the executives. And we always, I can tell you now, at the beginning of each financial year, we planned what our sales were going to be, so we knew what our bonuses were going to be at the end of the year. And we drove our business entirely on our bonus structure. And that'll eventually, all those bankers, they're not going to walk away from what comes into their hand. So I think that my own personal view is that that'll eventually change. Well, it's a fact. It is a fact. I can tell you now, if you go to Stockland, you go to Mirvac, all those executives there, it's based on how much they can earn.
Claire, you've got a comment in response to Ross?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, ultimately, this 4 pillars is under question. They haven't got enough competition. That's the reality. And
why were we praising the 4-pillar concept through the GFC, praising the 4 pillars, and now we've turned around, and when things are okay, we start bashing the banks again?
Well, it's just not winning games.
Could I just make a point of clarification? Last time I checked, the bank I work for would still provide a 95% LVR
You're quite right.
loan
No, you're
with
absolutely
lender's
right.
mortgage insurance
Yes.
to someone who can service
Very
it.
true.
So
Agreed.
just-
You can. That's the reality.
The only thing I will say,
So the process, knowing someone in the mortgage industry, the process now for someone to get a loan at that rate, and I accept that rate, is so onerous to the extent that line items on a statement are dissected to the point of people being told, you have too many visits to the Crown Casino, and on that basis, we're not giving you the loan. That's an issue.
There is greater focus on all expenses, and this is the result of some of the feedback from the Royal Commission. So previously, when assessing serviceability for a loan, we would be very focused on servicing that loan. But there's also other things, and school fees is a big one. That is a commitment, and that would now be included in that serviceability calculation, whereas several years ago it may not have been. And there is, without doubt, a greater scrutiny around the lifestyle, the expenses, that sort of thing. And on one hand, you could argue, well, surely if someone has a mortgage, they're going to pay that instead of going to the Crown Casino, and there's probably some merit in that argument. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad thing that the banks are checking more carefully, and this goes back to some of your, because we want it to be sustainable for the client and for the market.
Yeah. Probably though, if 95% loan from the bank though, Claire, it's a 30% mortgage insurance that you've got to pay, which defeats this whole, I haven't got a deposit. I've got to come up with 20 or 30,000 for mortgage insurance. But look, but anyway, your point is right. If you've got the money, well, you can borrow the money.
The government's not solving the problem though with a 5% deposit. All the government's doing is covering the LMI, which if you...
No. But the thing is, they're also, Claire just said, there are 95% loans. The government covers the LMI, problem gone, because that's the real problem. Once you've got that, assuming you've got the wherewithal, you've got the income. Yeah.
Josh, you got a comment?
Just a couple of brief comments. One is, I appreciate the bank should do their checks and balances, but it's gone to the complete extreme. Because as an accountant, I'm asked to do tax returns and accounts and do all sorts of funny declarations that is tailored to each particular bank, that they're going to do certain things, and assume everyone here is bankable, but it's gone to the complete extreme, and it's not the bank's fault. It's that because I speak to different bankers, and effectively some of them have centralised their risk process into somewhere. So whereas previously someone could speak to somebody and go, there's some history here, it's completely removed now. Secondly, there's going to be a bit more innovation, not innovation, but change in the lending market. We're dominated by the banks. In the US, it's 70-80% non-bank lenders. In Australia, it's about, 15-20%. We're way behind. So it's growing, right? And even the banks are buddying up with non-bank lenders now to try and fill in some of the gaps. So I'm definitely seeing developers helping buyers with financing, doing their own checks, right? Because they can definitely still afford it, but the major banks might just have not the allocation. So it's a very evolving space right now.
It also gives the opportunity for investors such as yourself or anyone in the room who have got cash to have the ability to then start participating in that market and be rewarded handsomely for doing so. Now, that's not going to last forever. The more and more non-bank lenders we get, I think the number's less than 20%, but it is growing. The more and more that come to the market, you'll start to see interest rates come down as well. Sure. Can we wait for a microphone, please?
Look, for those who've been in the market for a while, they probably know a lot better than me. I've seen a few cycles happen. And if you remember, probably about 15, 20 years ago, the likes of Aussie Home Loans and LAM didn't exist. The only reason they came about is because of the bank tightening their lending. There's a lot of private fund money going around. You can borrow up to $5 million within a 48% approval, provided it all does stack up. So it's not all gloom and doom. And look, the way I look at it, everybody's talking about the market currently isn't a dip, a huge dip. If our clearance rate is 63%, 63% is not a good indication of Melbourne clearance rate. Where I live in Boroondara, the clearance rate last week was 71%. Melbourne as a whole was 63%. So when we say 63% when a market is really down and everybody is thinking it's gloom and doom, I think I'll take it any time. Our market is not driven by growth, not driven by economy. It's driven purely by population growth. When I migrated to this country 20 years ago, I think we had about 7 million less people than we do have now. And I remember one of my friends who went to Scotch College, he was told me they're actually going to go to camp in Pakenham. That's where the Scotch used to do their camping. Now Pakenham has become one of the outside suburbs. So these suburbs didn't exist back now, and we're only 25 million. As we speak currently, every 5.5 people of us here in this room work to support one pensioner. This is very unsustainable, and that's why our tax rates are the highest in the world. More people are going to come to this country to make it more affordable. At 25 million, we've got suburbs like Pakenham, like you suggested, Tregonine and all of that. So if the population grow by 10 million alone, where are we going to put these people? Now, whether we like it or not, the market will continue to grow. Banks will have to lend money, they'll tighten up. If they don't lend money, different companies will come to the market. The bank will have to answer to the shareholder, like you suggested, they'll start lending again, and this cycle will continue again. Up until we've got a population of about 50 million, the same thing will happen again and again and again. And look, I've seen it again. If anybody here in this room can pick a property from 10 years ago, I won't go any further, and show me that the property today is worth less than 10 years ago, then my argument will be lost. I thought I'd leave it goes on that note. We're talking about real cities here.
Your comments are absolutely right, but I think a lot of people have a difficulty control. Emotion plays a big part in people's decision-making process, and that's why the newspapers make tons of money on these headlines. The challenge we have as investors, and like I talked about, is the ability to look out. People can't look out 10 years. People don't know what they're doing next year. How are they going to look out 10 years? So I think our job is to educate people, give them some of the statistics that you give, encourage them to make some brave decisions. But we need, most importantly, to allow people and give people the information to think long term. But people want, your comment, Paul, before about, I want to live in a house now. I want to make money now. Why isn't my property going up? I bought it last month. Why hasn't it gone up? When it goes down, I'm not going to look at it, right? So we just need to start thinking a little bit more long term than what we currently do. Any comments? No? Any more questions? There's a limit of 2 questions per person today.
Thanks,
I'm
Robert.
only kidding.
Thank you. Thank you. Just on that clearance rate the last gentleman commented on, I'm a buyer's advocate, and I would say that clearance rate is probably equivalent to fake news at the moment. What we've got on the market is a very limited amount of good stock. We've got quite a few qualified buyers, and they're all climbing over the top of each other because there's no supply. Once supply comes on in spring, which hopefully it will, you'll find the clearance rate will go down. So I wouldn't get too excited about the clearance rate that's just been mentioned. Second question, is it Claire, is it? Claire, with the build-to-rent properties, have you been privy to the feasibility studies on rates of return on those projects? And second question there is, will the Mirvacs of the world hold them, or would they offload them eventually, do you think? Because I don't know how they can work on a rate of return basis.
In relation to your first question, for the Mirvac ones, no, but I have seen some feasibilities, and it is hard to make it stack up, and it's, as I said before, due to the land tax and stamp duty. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
The second part was, do you see those developers holding those projects long term? Yeah,
well, True Build to Rent is held on one title. However, Mirvac will be separating the titles of their development in Sydney. I'm not sure about the one in Melbourne. So, True Build to Rent from the US would come and say, as soon as you separate the title and sell one, the whole thing's, it's not build to rent.
I know there are some people in this room that may or may not be playing in that space. Does anyone have a comment on that? Or care to share any further insight? Okay. Any other questions? In the microphone, please. Thanks, Phil.
In the US, they don't have duty and land tax. They have property tax, but they don't have land tax and duty, especially duty. They don't have zero.
Yeah, exactly. And they've also found ways to make it the cream on the top, I guess, which is to provide services and have people pay for them because of the convenience. The Netflix, the dry cleaning, the cleaning, whatever else it is.
But I think it's worth also mentioning that there is a looming, not looming, it's already here, a huge social housing problem. That somehow or another, somebody's got to sort it out. Which I think it's going to come back to the government. I think the government's already trying to do something by recycling some of their old stock. We're involved in a program at the moment where we're redeveloping some of their old stock into a higher density form. But I think the whole social housing thing is huge now, and I think that the government circles are really wondering how they're going to solve this problem, because there's a whole lot of people on those waiting lists trying to get into a home.
It's more of a comment or a question. This gentleman in front of me talked about the stamp duties and taxes in the US. I used to work with people in the US many years ago, and they told me that the mortgage interest on the home loan was tax deductible for them. I don't know if that's still the case. It was and still is. What's the view that might be a viable alternative to getting rid of negative gearing by making tax deductions for a person buying their home?
I really like your idea.
I think
It's not going to happen. Sorry, in short word, yeah.
I think the tit for tat for that is that they get taxed on the capital gain on their home.
Yeah, I agree with that. They should. They should. Yeah. Or they can take the option to not do it. They can roll it. Yeah, they can roll it. But it gets them into the market.
Another question.
Too big a number.
Yeah, there was one change. I just might comment on this, but not so much recently, but just when they took away the off-the-plan stamp duty concession, and of course with a lot of projects, they want pre-sales, and I was just wondering what the observations are in the market as to, apart from all the projects which are just seeing out their completion, what's happening in relation to that? Are a lot of people saying, well, why should I buy off the plan? Why don't I wait and see what it's like? If I've got to pay the duty anyway, I'll just wait and see what the completed product's like.
That is exactly what's happening. It is hard to sell off the plan at the moment. Very hard.
And especially for investors to get the finance, I think that's the main thing.
You can't sell off the plan, therefore you can't.
Have a very anti-business state government.
Yep.
That has introduced some very bad things for property development.
Well, you've just had a state government have just announced they're going to increase the rate of stamp duty for overseas buyers. So because you're coming from offshore and you're coming into Australia to buy a property, you're now penalised at 8%, which is just criminal. So the government has put in place a number of measures in the last budget, which is certainly going to impact on the overseas buyers coming in. There was, in my view, and this is only my view, there was a bit of a fallacy about the impact of the Chinese into the marketplace. Anyway, the Chinese certainly bought into places like Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley, those areas, but that released those vendors to be able to go and reinvest elsewhere into new housing or whatever. So you cut that out and all of a sudden they wonder why their stamp duty revenue has dropped.
It's a very scary, because half of Tim Palace's revenue comes from property taxes, basically. And if you think about stamp duty, when it first came in, I'll get it wrong, 1920, 1930s, there was actually quite a lot of effort the government had to do to help with the land title transfers, and 5.5% back then was quite small. But maybe on the foreign investor side, just to put some context, in Australia, in our Asia Pacific neighbours, as we know, our corporate tax rate is 27.5%, 30%. Singapore 17%, Hong Kong 16.5%, Malaysia 24%. So we've actually got a lot of interest, as we know, for people that want to invest in our country and help build stuff. Our tax rate already on the face value is not great, and then we're adding these surcharges. And look, it's not that people from overseas can't afford it. They honestly probably could. And I spoke to those clients, they probably could afford it, but it's the sentiment, because they started, and Victoria's leading the way on this. They added the foreign stamp duty surcharge 4% a few years ago, then they increased it to 7%, now 8%. So it's, and it's just unnecessary.
Josh, excuse the ignorance. Who are they trying to line their own pockets? Is it people they're trying to please? What is it?
Just my personal view, people from overseas don't vote, for one. So, secondly, the revenue is dropping because property transactions aren't happening, so they're trying to make an excuse and say New South Wales, the surcharge rate is now 8%, so we're aligning it nationally. So it's a very lazy way to try and get revenue. It's a very almost irresponsible way to get revenue, to be honest, in my personal view. And also land tax surcharges. And I'll give you an example. If you're a foreign buyer of property, you have to pay an extra 2%. It will be 2% land tax every year. And the reality is this land tax, if you buy an office building, for example, a lot of the lease agreements for tenants is that they wear the cost of land tax. And who's sitting in the buildings in the city and in the suburbs? It's Australian businesses, right?
I got my notice last week.
Correct, and the government, right? So who's actually paying for it? It's actually us. So
it's not entirely true. It depends on the actual property, and the Retail Tenancies Act means you don't pay any land tax.
yeah, correct. For the commercial properties, I was talking about. Yeah.
Retail tenancies.
Yeah, and I'm talking about office as an example. Yeah. Yeah.
Question for you, Josh, and it relates to overseas students, primarily Chinese, but also Indian. They come and study in Australia. They can then get residency in Australia, and they can work here for a period of time. Are these people the sleepers in terms of the increase in immigration in Australia, and how are they placed to purchase property in Australia, and are they a part of the market helped essentially by Paul, being the parent?
Clearly, we've got that huge overseas student population. In terms of my experience, I actually had one experience where I gave an opportunity for someone that didn't have permanent residency, that temporary residency but studied here, and she was incredibly smart. And part of getting permanent residency is getting a work, and so we gave her a job outside of my HR's recommendation. But it just so happened that after a certain period, she still couldn't qualify to get permanent residency. So I think a lot of the students here, the big issue for them is it will be difficult for them to stay.
So having got it,
yeah.
they can then buy property as if they're a resident?
100%. Yeah, once you're PR, you're basically like a local when it comes to property and taxes. Yeah.
Raf, have you got a question?
Oh, no.
No? Any other questions?
Oh, I have actually.
Okay.
Back on the land tax.
We've got time for maybe one more, and we might start winding up.
Just on the revenue raising and all the local government land tax, if anyone else has been charged with land tax recently, it's effectively doubled in the last 12 months, and it's actually 200% in the last 2 years. I mean, it's a huge, huge revenue play, and I don't know if anyone else is having trouble, but it's putting a serious dampener on a lot of stuff, and it's going to stop a lot of things happening as well. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. It's just not a good thing. It's not pro-business, and it's not pro-property development.
Interestingly, we talk about affordability, and the amount of taxes that have been put onto property, which just has to flow through to prices, is crazy. It is irresponsible, I think, to talk about the same thing.
The only relief is in the recent Victorian budget last week that they have a Victoria Auditor General that does valuations, and in the most recent valuations for 2019, they're going to come back a little bit. But basically, everyone bought property when the market was hot, and so there was a complete readjustment of land tax prices. So it was a significant increase.
I know our landlords are objecting to the increase through the State Revenue Office. Have you seen clients or anyone have success in objections with the SRO?
Honestly, it's quite hard. It's quite rare. So it'll increase by, let's say, I'll call it 100%. But what happens is I have a client, they'll say, look, Last time it was 2 million, now it's 4 million on the land value. And I said, that's crazy. And I said, how much did you buy it for? Oh, I bought it for 5 million, and it's just a block of land. So I said, okay, well, you bought it for 5 and they're valuing it at 4. Do you still want to challenge it? And then you have to put it into context. So a lot of it has been due to the recent purchasing. Yeah.
One final question. Does anyone else have any others other than Raf? No?
Just on the land tax on property without a building on it, which is quite interesting. There is no land tax.
Well, it's an old house that doesn't have much value.
I'm just saying it's quite funny that buildings aren't worth much, right? It's the land.
Final question for each of you. Where would you or where are you investing your money right now?
I can answer that. And repaying my mortgage and paying my kids' school fees.
Getting more financing.
Property.
So we're in property, Ross. So we talk about...
I think, as we've all talked about, this is just another one of the cycles. That property is where most of the wealth in this country has been made, or a lot of the wealth, and it's going to happen. It's going to keep happening. We're going to have population increases. So, provided you have a sensible medium-term to long-term view of the world, I personally, I guess, being a migrant background, I'm comfortable with that. Rather than, there's the share market. I mean, if you're in the share market, I mean, you've got daily volatility. I don't know how you cope with all that. I mean, that's, at least with land, it only happens now and again.
Because you only look at it now and again, right?
It only happens when you sell.
Yeah, well.
Peter, Josh, any comments on that?
I'd say buy in Dalesford.
Are you selling? Are you selling, Peter?
I am actually. Property prices have doubled in the last 5 years and continue to go up.
Josh, where are your clients buying?
That's what I was going to give you my perspective. So, buy and hold land. Property land will only go up, right? So that's what I do.
Where are they buying?
Where are they buying? Some of them are land banking. Some of them are buying investment properties that have just a rental income on the way through. Generally, that's what's happening.
Where are the land bankers buying?
Out in the west. Although it's really expensive now. So I'm sort of, I guess I have the benefit of seeing clients that have been with our firm for 25, 30 years, and actually I've got an anecdotal story. I got 2 clients that are Maltese background, and they built their family homes out in the west, Plumpton, Rockbank, that sort of thing. And so when they went there, it was just farmland, and now it's worth tens of millions. Lion Park, and they're just simple people, and they're worth a lot of money, but we've got clients with portfolios of land that they just don't want to sell, because I'm a tax advisor, so honestly what I say is when you sell, the only people that win is the government with the stamp duty, and the next one you have to buy, the Australian Taxation Office with your capital gains, the real estate agent, so me a little bit, but I'd rather you keep your money, and yeah.
You'll have no job, Josh. Please, can you join me in thanking our panellists for today? Thank you so much. If you want to know more about how the night went, what we talked about, some of the facts we looked at, and what the point of view was of the presenters and the panel, please get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. Cool.
Well done.
I'll let you put it together.
Good job.
Thanks, man. Hey, we're getting quicker, right?